there's some slides, and then you can also read it rather than only hear it. And it's a model that I was introduced in the MBCL with Fritz and Eric. And since I'm working, or Fritz is accompanying me as a meditation teacher, so I always connect that very strongly to his teachings. And also the words are sort of the everyday words, friends of life, rather than I will show you the official spiritual terms from the Eastern wisdom tradition. First of all, let's do this. Then can we enlarge this? Can I have what happened to my dia show?
No, it's on the...
Here we are. Okay. 4 friends of life, and we want to introduce them, so it could be a helpful model to call them up in everyday parenting life. So that's the overall view. Actually, it's something like starting up here, which we right now tried to invite in the meditation, loving kindness. And then maybe also you can call it friendliness. This is another appropriate translation of these Pali words. And it's maybe not as dramatic as loving kindness, whereas loving kindness works well with our kids. And as a basic attitude, yeah. And we had that in our small group yesterday, and we need to explain it a bit better when we did the self-compassion part. The idea is that this friendliness, the wish for your well-being, once that meets suffering, and actually there could be suffering in here. Once that meets suffering, that loving kindness turns into compassion. I'm seeing your suffering, I'm feeling your suffering, and my loving kindness turns into the wish of relieving at least part of your suffering or wishing you well. And very interesting friend of life on the other end is when this attitude of loving kindness or friendliness meets your joy, then it has a good chance of transferring into sympathetic joy. That is my joy about you being joyful, or about you having success, or you having achieved something. And in these wisdom traditions, they are like the heavenly abodes, or it's the qualities that transcendent way beyond ourselves. So that is part of the educational value. When we cultivate them, we're going outside and bringing it to the world. And so they are kind of helpful for against hatred, avoiding cruelty, and here especially avoiding envy. That's the opposite of being envy. If I'm happy that you're successful, or that you have whatever you need, or that you're proud with whatever you achieved. If one really works with them in everyday life and say, hey, what friend of life might I call up? Then that's why they're always also, it's a model that they're not only the glorious friends and in that corner everything is fine. It's a bit like one of these boards where you balance. You have that ball in the middle, and then there's this board, and you can balance. And the idea is, once you kind of balance or out of balance too much on one side, or if you're diving deeper, it can have a pitfall of that. If it's only this quality, it might turn into some problems. And I changed that here into turning sticky. If I'm only in loving kindness, everything might be like in the chocolate shop and getting very, there is no other notion anymore. And I put attachment in brackets. It's what the pitfall is called in the spiritual tradition, but it's a bit confusing with us and parents, attachment theory and all of that, because the bonding and being close and being attached is helpful in our parenting. So it means being overly sticky. The compassion part can, if you're only diving into compassion and also seeing, I heard that a little bit in terms of, how would that work for the emotions that I also have. Just the morning reading something about, again, the climate conference and the lady from Kenya reporting about it and again going into what's happening in Africa, what are you rich nations doing, and what do you demand from us? So there is a chance of, if I'm in my balancing board, turning all into the suffering of the world, I have a chance of losing myself, and I'm kind of getting lost in that hole of suffering. And then there is a chance of, if I sense that and say, okay, that's not going to help the world if I'm down there in that hole. So what friend of life can I call up? Can I call up joy in life? Because that's balance in me again, and I still can be compassionate. Or is it equanimity, as we will focus on more right now, a little bit, of being in a more balanced state with all the qualities? And the one over here, even that has a pitfall in terms of, if I'm overly in joy or sympathetic joy, it could be overexciting. It could be, I don't even know about the hypocrisy, but I always get that feedback or mirrored and say, yes, over enthusiasm also can cost you a lot of energy, and sometimes no, when I check the calendar and say, Fritz is right, maybe some equanimity is helpful, or some slowing down in order to protect yourself from being sort of overly out there. A very important part of this is in the middle here, that we would say these are qualities not only to be scooped out for all the others. Hey, come back. But also cultivated for ourselves, because then that's the true balance, to say, well, I can only be friendly to others in the long run when I'm friendly with myself as well. Otherwise, it's just not working. We're doing a lot here about self-compassion, and I can be compassionate with others in the long and healthy run as long as I'm balancing it with self-compassion. Otherwise, I have a good chance of burning out or being in empathy fatigue. I definitely can only be in sympathetic joy when I have joy of life myself. Otherwise, I'm really quickly into envying the joy of others if I don't have my own joy of life. And what I always like to point out is that these three up here, they seem to be so easily in practice when we are parents, because we have that big experience playground with our kids, and we have a natural ground for loving kindness, for compassion, for sympathetic joy. I mean, we are friendly with our kids, hopefully, and we give all the well-being wishes. Once they are suffering and hurt or hurt their knee, we're in compassion. Once they are full of joy and look what I built, then we're easily into the sympathetic joy. I kind of want to joke always, once my son is not reaching the aim of the year in school and has to redo the class, then maybe sympathetic joy is going to be something interesting once the neighbor kid comes and say, look, Jörg, I won the prize for the best works in school. So that could be a bit demanding. Then, but still, it's an invitation. Hey, can I still be in the joy of and not drip in the pitfall of enviness? But I always like to say this equanimity part, which actually in the spiritual teaching is kind of the big bowl all the others rest in. And it's kind of the foundation to be able to live compassion in the long run, to be able to live sympathetic joy or loving kindness. And have that as a balancing ground. But that's not in our biological setup as parents. I would say that's the very opposite to that. I'm not in equanimity about the life of my kid. From my evolutionary point of view, I'm all into that they live and that they survive, and I would give my life for them and all of it. Yeah? So that's something that is really kind of a mental training and the mental state of inviting that, because then again, we need it. As a protection against over-involvement. The pitfall would be if I'm totally into equanimity or if I'm overdoing it, then it could turn into indifference, which in the German language, the words are so close to each other. So usually it's kind of mistaken. So let's look at this. That's what I was saying. This is anchored, and we have the daily practice of it if it works nice, but this one is not. We have all kinds of other feelings towards, and that's the one we want to focus on a little bit now, as a helpful friend of life. That's something that is done in mindfulness, and John Kabat or whoever was the original source. You cannot stop the wave of life, but you can learn to surf on them. I was saying, hey, for myself, it's a bit too sporty and too overdoing. And for parents also, maybe I just can be carried on it. Maybe it's like on an air mat and I'm very slowly on the waves rather than being able to surf and be whatever, Californian sunshine guy. But is it possible to be with rather than having to structure and control everything? And that is part of what equanimity teaches, accepting situations you can't change, and accepting, first of all, my own experiences, and like that radical acceptance to that. Engaging. I mean, equanimity is not that withdrawal and say, let everybody do his job and I don't care. It's that finding that sweet spot about it. I'm touched, I'm engaged, I'm with it, but I'm not so drawn in that I'm identified totally with everything. And I'm not so drawn in that I am the boss who needs to reckon everything. It's kind of a teaching in modesty that in the book there's a chapter, our grandiosity of parenting, that we have the feeling that everything depends on us. There are so many other influences and things. So that's all what is in there as well. And to be able to face the pleasant and the unpleasant ones and then give up a little bit of that idea that everything is in my hands. This is a kind of equanimity prayer or whatever you call it. It had different sources, sometimes very Christian, addressing God, sometimes not. But it's, may I have that grace to accept things that cannot be changed and the courage, because that's the energy. It's not giving everything up that should be changed. And there is a big thing about that we constantly, day for day, need to figure out that wisdom to distinguish one from the other. And I think in a very, let's say, parenting way, I remember all these discussions with my wife about when would the girls be allowed to drive by bicycle alone to the playground. That's sort of the practical part of equanimity. Yeah? They had to cross one street in a residential area, and then my wife is going, oh, and sometimes they drive so fast on that little road. Yeah? And I was going, well, but then again, it's a rather safe surrounding. When will they ever be allowed to go there by their own? I mean, we can't wait till they're 18. At some point, it's adequate that they do their own experiences. So, and we were going back and forth, and obviously we were happy nothing ever happened, which then is the case in parenting. Sometimes accident happens. So, yeah, that's the context of the 4 friends of life that we want to invite, and then invite with a meditation that quality of equanimity. But maybe there are right now questions or comments or something. We can work both ways. We can do the meditation first, which brings it into the experiential part. And we said then maybe we do the break and then come back to it. That's the limits of my means. You might remember that from the orientation seminars, but we said we would do that again in real experiential. It's not so long, and it's always a kind of a special baby and centerpiece for me. So would that be okay to just do that and then give a little break, and then we see what we need to discuss or feedback on that before we do any teaching parts? Okay. Sounds good to me. Actually need to get oriented again. Because I always, with that alongside, I need the text as well. And it's almost like a poem, so. But I'm inviting you to sort of settle in a meditative pose. If you want to, put aside your pens or whatever and settle down into closing your eyes and maybe taking this soothing breath